How do I put it up there?
There.
Okay. Jamie, I want to thank you for your presentation because you brought up real good questions about how do we introduce time, or Darwin, back into the future. And last time I talked about we are prisoners of the scientific mind. And today I want to talk about how do we get out of jail card? Because I see cybernetics as kind of into a cul-de-sac of second order subjective constructivism. And what I want to propose really builds on what Lou talked about is how can we think beyond Alice's and the Red King's dream? My answer will be there is a natural history of levels of consciousness, and I'll give concrete examples in history. And this is part of what I prepared for this September in Moscow with the Russian Academy of Sciences and International Cybernetics, where I was addressing issues that you dealt with, Jason, about Marxism and cybernetics. Because what I did in this paper was really show how Marx was imprisoned in the thinking of science that came out of Comte in terms of analytic, and you'll see this in my quickly presentation, that the way you think in terms of your context and meta context has consequence. So how do we get out of jail? And I did this last time just at the end, is how do we organize our symbolic space beyond mere survival? Whether you're doing a cave art or whether you're doing mathematics there, they are both tool sheds and laboratories of the mind, but they focus on a type of reality and preform the reality that we can deal with and types of problems that we can deal with. Now, Orwell did not comment directly upon Kuhn, but what he would have said is those who control the past, the present, control the past. Those who control the past control the future. That's a feedback loop. That's a loop of how do we get our memories and others organized into a form that we can then see what's in front of us. We must be aware of the paradigms we live, or as Lou was talking about, that we live into our paradigms, basically. And evil is what worked in the past, yet is dragged into a different future. And I've been doing for 7 years research on an experiment that's in real time. There are two men from Montpellier, as I said last time, Comte and Madison. They both came. Madison's plantation was called Montpellier. Comte came from Montpellier. The human-centered consciousness, which was the primary model for Marx and the various totalitarian theorists, is that there's a crystalline truth function based upon mathematics and physics. And that's where I talked about last time, the inability of science and math to go down to the complexity of sociology. It's a Newtonian universe of power and forces. It's not about information, which is the dividing point into cybernetics. It's external behaviorism and control results in a centralized state. So time is linear, human-centric, rational progress, where history is a one-way arrow with human intentionality, human purpose. It's human-centric. Now, this guy that came along, James Madison, when America was falling apart, understood not just a half revolution of overcoming oppression, where we kicked out the British. That was the boot on the neck, the knee on the neck type thing. We took away that. The system was falling apart. So they had to put together a whole new system of processes, not just principles. And so from 1781, when we won, to 84, we fell apart. From 84 to 1791, we created a whole framework and way of thinking based upon a very different process of systems. If you go back and read their letters, they're talking about systems everywhere, feedback loops. This was the Republic of Letters that went across the Atlantic, went up and down the east coast of America. It was an organic truth function based upon emergent interactions. All politics is about parts and wholes. How do you get that? Governing by antidotes to power, by empowering the parts, by helping with the whole, come down with looking at adjacencies, interactions, instead of using the rational principles of Kant. Design of environmental interfaces, adjacencies, infrastructure, decentralized self-governing nation. Time was the essential ingredient that changed how Americans organized the political structures. Cyclical, system-centric design of complex evolutionary structures that, Jamie, you were looking for. So the question is, okay, that's history, interesting. What is the consequence? Remember, because my title was about the natural history. Think of going to the museum and seeing dinosaurs. Natural history over time of function and structure. So what is our new science? Because I see this as not trying to criticize science. Science does a great job. Mathematics really hones in that precision that Lou was talking about. But what Frank Boas said in his 1887 article is this type of positivism is eclipsing the descriptive sciences of perception and construction of place, geography, human anthropology, and the cosmology. So what is our going to be looking like? It's a system of our image systems, design tools of new living paradigms or living systems. So what are the tools of natural history and the consequence of organization of those ideas? Natural history, you look at the 6 finches on the Galapagos Islands that came from one finch because those finches bred, they used up the food supply of their beaks. So they had to get different beaks to hit the hard nuts to go to get after the worms. So is that interactionism that Darwin was talking about. And I'll show you how it's not just the survival of the fittest, but it's the arrival of the fittest. And that'll be my last slide when I talk about that. So we're looking for an ecology for systemic change, how to foster and empower disruptive innovation and ongoing renewal of the system. So, Jamie, you asked about evolution. Central thesis of systems, and Lou has written some very good articles on that reflexive structure, is seen in conversation and learning theory that we've talked about, is that there's a discontinuity between a class and its members. That's Bates and Russell, or between the meta-symbolic system, the paradigm, and the system itself. So if you look at this chart, which is basically a fitness, so a person or a species or civilization is in the fitness area in the blue. It then goes to what they talk about is the phenotype space, or how that civilization is structured, or how our scientific culture is structured.
I think you want your next slide.
This one?
Well, all I see is what would observer levels 3 and 4 investigate? And you referred to blue, which looks like a later slide.
Oh, okay. This one doesn't come up?
No change.
Okay, if I go back there, that's the couple guys.
No change.
Maybe you share the statistics, a wrong screen.
I'm changing it. I'm not changing it.
No.
Ah.
You share the wrong screen.
Well, I have it up on my screen. Should I go back and,
Yeah, choose the right screen to share.
well, I've clicked on it, but that doesn't come up here. It's like it's frozen or something like that.
Yeah, we see a frozen screen that your mouse stay at one position, no move at all.
My mouse is not moving
No.
because it's moving on mine.
So what you need to do is to stop sharing and do it again.
Yep.
We are not still seeing, or you are viewing Lowell Christy's screen, but it's the wrong screen. It's a frozen screen.
Okay. Your screen sharing is paused.
Yeah, you pause.
Okay.
Don't pause. Just do a stop and do it again.
Yep. Nice. Kill that. Yeah. Let me try. New share.
Now we are seeing your Zoom screen.
Yeah, I just came up in Zoom screen. Okay, let's see if I can. All I can see is you and
I'm heading out to Westmont.
Your PowerPoint is on a different
I'm heading out to Westmont.
location.
What are you doing?
I'm looking at two.
Just wait. I'll mute.
Oh, sorry.
okay, did that come up? Did that come up?
Yeah, that is a different screen, and
Does it have red, white, and blue on it?
yeah, red line, blue line, like a network thing.
Okay, that's the one I was trying to get to. I guess I'm back to it. So what I was saying is there's a fitness area of survival. The phenotype space is the paradigm of the specific culture. The genotype space is the area of evolution, the library of possibilities. So you're really dealing, and the American experiment was based upon a dual universe of parts that have, in Adam Smith's terms, the invisible hand. When de Tocqueville talked about America, it was the art of assembly. Those were the capacities to bring in new things to our paradigms for change that Jamie was asking about. So you're looking at a type of science that would be looking at description of your fitness function, your existing truth function, and if you go from a comp truth function, it specifies a particular type of fitness of physical objects. But we're talking about the social estate of man, not the physical estate of man. So you have to go to the larger structure. How does your system create feedback loops, conversations that can penetrate from the fitness back into the phenotype, back into this genotype space? So what I ended up last time was it's all about levels of observers linked into paradigms of learning. Evolutionary learning occurs at the species system pattern of patterns level, not individually. It's the species level, it's the civilization level, the cultural level. Progression of learning in a truth function of the epistemology under differing learning paradigms. So you have, as I said before, you have the stimulus response of animals, evolutionary formed instincts, the morphology, the structure of a mollusk in the shell, it protects it. The intelligence is in the structure of the shell, not in its brain. So in the human terms, what is the intelligence of our structures of institutions? Because our institutions are the shells that have developed over time to allow survival. The highest level for cybernetics is that top level of 3 and 4, which is the informed me, how I think, my formation, the formation of China, of a person from China, how do I interact, that interaction. But then you need to go to an ecological formation. So information, exoformation, ecoformation, that's the system of systems. It's the design of the evolutionary habitat. So here's my proposal for a science of paradox, a science of learning, a science of feedback loops. Those are the 3rd and 4th levels of learning. And so, as every engineer knows in 101, you have to have 3 points to find the center, right? So what each of these was like levels of consciousness. I think we need to talk not about the things of science, objective knowledge. We talk about levels of consciousness. So in our command control purposive world, we look at the issues, the problems, we look at the intentions, the agenda, and the work and the tools. That's the lower level of the fitness side. And that's our intentional consciousness. And that's where rationality and Comte and others come in, which says, give me the absolute principle, like the French Revolution, and we will make it real. We will force people into that. Now, I've done the calculations. The moon is 239,700 miles away from the Earth. In the 20th century, governments have killed enough people, if you figure each person is 5'6" to go head to toe all the way to the moon and build mountains on the moon because of ideologies of science. So our ideas of science have consequence when they try to go from the physics down to the political. So command and control is one level of consciousness. Now, here's the real twist when you look at Lewis Carroll and the whole idea through the looking glass. He was talking about the level of the image, how we form the image, the different cultures. You go across the brook, you go into a Jabberwocky world. It's a different logic. You go from physics to chemistry, it's a different logic, a different language. But there, you need to be looking at the 3 components of learning. How does that system, organism learn? The principles and standards. So we had the Declaration of Independence, had all the principles, but had no processes. Then the structure and the context. So what Kenneth Boulding wrote in his book of the image on his time at Hoover Institute in Stanford was, we need a science of the image and how it forms and what it forms around. That's what Heinz von Forster's task to me 50 years ago was in Mexico. I don't understand how Nazism and the image and all these Teutonic myths that they brought to the stage of the everyday in the Nuremberg rallies allowed people to then think differently. That's the science there. But what I've seen in the American experiment is they looked at an ontological level that helped inform the image level that then helped inform the command and control level. So you have ontological questions of how does the system process information? What's the identity of that system and the relationship structures? So you have 3 levels there. That's of consciousness. That's one way of looking at it. The other way is levels of interaction. The formation within the observer, the exoformation of the observed, what's that structure out there, and then looking at that ecoformation of the whole that provides a context that downward causality, whatever we want to call that, influences the parts and how they organize. Now, if you look at the level of consequences, which is the ethical question, ethics becomes epistemology. What is your truth function of your meta context, of how you structure your science, how you structure interactions? And there you look at impact on empowerment or disempowerment of parts or individuals. You're either into self-regulation or into an external control. That's a level of consequence. Increase in strategic options, ability to bridge gaps. That's what Heinz von Forster talked about, is everything should be able to increase your strategic options. That's a collective intelligence task. And then the last one is impact on interactions, infrastructure, adjacencies. How do we map our blind spots, which is something that Jamie and I interacted before. Last slide. So through the looking glass, perceptual systems science of organization of the image and its natural history, how those structures of interaction evolve over time. So how do we get beyond the Red King dreaming of Alice and Alice dreaming of being in that situation, and getting beyond the last line of through the looking glass is life, what is it but a dream? Well, it's more than a dream what happened in communist Russia, China, killing fields of Cambodia. So the key is the design, time, and levels of conversation. And that's where the other previous slide dealt with levels of interaction that could form a science, possibly. That's it, thanks. Comments, questions?
Thank you. When I used the metaphor of Alice as in the dream of the Red King, I wasn't talking about going beyond it. I was actually talking about coming to it, in the sense that once you allow reflexive language and once you recognize that your language is reflexive, then the constructions of Lewis Carroll become normalized. They become part of what happens all the time, and one can recognize them. So in that sense, one can go beyond them, because one begins to understand how these constructions have been made. So indeed, we induce dreams in one another all the time, and the politicians do as well, and very skillfully. And so to recognize the multiplicity of realities that seem to be going on, we need to go beyond the Red King in understanding how language is doing this.
And I see in the American experiment them actually looking at a reflexive system that our republic republics the collective image of what people are interacting with. Oh, we kick out that guy, let's bring this new guy in, etc. It republics. It's a representative government, representing back to the people a mirror image that said, I don't think Trump's working. You know, it's a collective interaction. But that was the brilliance of the frame of government that resulted in the Constitution, Bill of Rights frame of government. It's a republican, it's a representative government. But it goes to
and the way you use that language is different from the way we have been taught in school to use it. We think of representation. A is a representative for B, but in fact the whole thing is in the form of the circularity of the maintenance of the system and the production of the system, so that the representatives are not so much representing as being part of the image and creating the image.
That's right. And it really, you know, as a cognitive archaeologist, I try to go back and reconstruct through their letters, through what was the supply chain of ideas, of how their ideosphere and then look at the consequence of those ideas over time. And that, I mean, that's just a methodology in my component, how I approach things. But when you look at how they read history then, and the rise and fall of the Roman Empire and Gibbon's, etc. Gibbon's whole thing was about patterns and the consequence of those patterns through time. So there was a convergence of systems thinking, of this invisible duality of, you know, the first line of the Declaration of Independence relies upon the laws of nature and the God of nature. And that was our formation of America, because nature challenged all the cultural assumptions of the Brits. So we had a better epistemology, we thought.
Yeah. I'm highly interested in your specific methodology of how to escape out of that jail. I mean, how do you help ourselves and help others to see the blind spot? I mean, to get out of the box. It's a very, very central theme that I would like to see if we could develop actual methodology. For example, I think.
Excuse me, could we go back to out of share screen so we can hold our conversation?
Okay, how do I get that? Come on, guys.
There is somewhere you say stop sharing.
That's at the top. Of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
How to get out of the box.
How to get out of the box. Thank you. Real lifetime.
But we're still in the box. Not yet.
There.
Okay.
There, you're out of the box.
Now we are in a different box. The thing is, well, we are in the expected box. I want to say one example would be a popular method called mind mapping. Literally that you draw a map of your thinking in terms of the concepts, the elements of the concepts that you used, and the relationships as lines, and their boundaries, and their positions, etc. So mind mapping, you can sort of unfold your own mind to let other people see, aha, and they may have a different kind of mind mapping as well. So if we sit together to compare our mind maps, then it's probably one way to open that blind spot. But I'm sure they should have a lot of more methodology that we can develop along this line, so that we, coming back to engineer, we can have a toolbox of how to fix our blind.
So
we need a toolbox.
is this a software? When you say mind mapping, are you thinking about a specific software, or?
They are softwares, but basically it's a book by a young man who developed the method. It's just helping a way to join the mind maps. If you Google mind map, you will see a lot of them.
I'll do.
That's a potential topic for next time, is what sort of methodologies would be in a toolbox? Because we've kind of made an interesting progression over these couple of meetings. But, you know, how do I do it? How does Jamie do it? How does Mr. Knotts do it, Lou?
Mr. Knotts will do it, Knotts.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about Knotts that really intrigues you and gives us an insight about interactions.
Yeah.
Maybe if that presentation by you would about that, what is it about knot theory and knot operations that are important?
So, but
well, yeah, I could address that, of course, directly. Yeah.
I could use that to bring up this again, Lou, that you had a meeting with the Lacanians. Is everyone familiar here with Lacan and Freud? I don't hear anything.
Not a lot. Just,
Well, okay. So Lacan really looked at Freud from the perspective of structures, and I thought maybe Lowell would know about it. And then, because Levi-Strauss then said, let's look at how universal those structures are. But as the Lacanians were interested in not theory to visualize what's going on in the mind. And so then they met with Lou when he was in Paris to, and I want to know, one day I want to really know what you guys did in those conversations. But it brings up this topic of psychoanalysis as a way of looking into our blind spots. And I'm just...
I think that Lacan saw some aspects of topology as powerful metaphors for the way the mind works. And apparently it was quite compelling because when I went to Paris, there were two different groups of people who were working on Lacanian ideas, somewhat independently, and they were publishing books and everything. And they weren't interacting with mathematicians so much as talking to each other about bits of topology and ideas that had come from Lacan.
Yeah, and I learned about it in the 90s at Purdue University, and now here in Ithaca, like a very good friend is a Lacanian, and so I started studying it again in 2012. But exactly like you described it as metaphors, like structural metaphors, and that we have a toolbox, and how that helps us understand the human mind.
So the toolbox there is, well, let me give you an example of a Lacanian metaphor. If you make a Mobius band, and I imagine you can visualize a Mobius band without my making one, right? You take a strip, you twist it by 180 degrees and paste it back to itself. Everybody knows a Mobius band. Yeah, it has one edge and one side. And if you were to draw a line down the middle, you'd get a single curve. But if you were to just walk a little bit to the right of the line you drew down the middle and try to come back, you would end up on the other side of it, and you'd have to go around twice before you came back to where you started, just as the edge of the Mobius band. So there's a 1 that becomes 2, and a 2 that becomes 1. And the 2 is connected in the large, but not locally. Locally, it appears to be 2. So it's a metaphor for the self. And it was used as such by Lacan. Now, I need to really read Lacan to find out more. I haven't done that scholarly journey. But apparently, in his toolbox, those metaphors were reinforced, or the exploration of them was extended by using the topological idea.
I think it's important to understand the importance of topological, which looks at the limits of language, because you can design a map is so much different than the words or the mathematical formulation. And a topology
that's
science.
the beginning of topology is the making of maps, indeed, and the maps are malleable and can be deformed and in all sorts of ways, and even completely deformed, like the subway map doesn't resemble anything except it holds nothing but the relations. Yeah.
So a toolbox of some form we need to be thinking through and noodle on.
So I scratched the surface with my comments, and at some point I'll probably send an email to put more meat to them. but I found it all very, very fascinating and interesting, the connections being discussed here. And
One of the primary distinctions in psychoanalysis is the Freudian use of the science of force,
Yeah.
desire, all those things versus information.
Mm-hmm.
And going towards topology mapping is informational versus, you know, this sexual desire and
Yeah.
this discontents of civilization and all these. I mean, he was basically doing a Newtonian universe in the brain. And
yeah,
actually giving concreteness to superegos and egos and everything else as objects. So we're looking at a dividing line of how to see the world.
But if your information becomes stretchy and malleable, then you're in a different kind of frame than the strictly deductive universe.
Right. It's more of a C.P. Peirce, not deduction or induction, but abduction.
yes, yes. I'm so glad you bring that up, Lowell, because that was for me also a milestone in my thinking to see the distinction between abduction, which takes time into account, at least that's the way I think about it, and then induction and deduction that's in a timeless universe.
Well, what we're going towards is how do we counter Tweedledee and Tweedledum, which are supposedly making distinctions, but they're in the same universe.
Yes.
So what are the real distinctions? We are force energy of Freud versus information. You know, what are these distinctions? You know, let us think about that this week. That we're basing upon that would give us a type of toolbox that would differ, because it's going to be descriptive, it's going to be topological, it's going to be many different things. So those distinctions that if we can draw them, that would be important instead of saying the observer.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to,
people.
Lowell, are you going to write an email description of next week's theme? And we'll follow your direction this time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Coming up for another presentation.
So you're going to ask each of us to make a toolbox, our toolbox.
I'll ask two things. What are the distinctions that we need to be grounded upon to go beyond Tweedledee and Tweedledum? And number two, what would a toolbox look like? What are the methods? You know, I'll talk about my cultural archaeology methods that I've had to invent to understand and reconstruct. You know, that's just my type of toolbox. A not toolbox. Now that'd be what are you doing there, Lou? What's a not toolbox looking like?
Well, I was showing you some. Remember, notice something. I didn't talk about knots today at all, but you still think I'm talking about knots. You're probably right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's a not methodology.
But I guess I have the opinion that we should teach people to make toolboxes of their own. So that's another aspect of the toolbox that would enable the making of toolboxes.
Right, and that was what the American experiments was. What do you do with the highest level to facilitate the formation of a new intelligence that can map closer to what the fitness thing on that chart, you know, the evolutionary, the fitness zone, because it changes. That fitness zone had an arrow of time moving. And that's, so intelligence of the corporate entities of the whole body of the politic has to have an intelligence more than the smarts of the politicians today and our truths today. It's evolutionary in Jamie's terms.
Okay, so not tomorrow, the next week I will just get my toolbox from my closet and do a yard sale to you guys.
Yard sale, yes. So bring your hammer and nails.
Yeah, let's do the yard sale.
All right.
All right.
Excellent discussion today. Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just very hungry now, intellectually hungry and biologically hungry as well. So let's continue this for another time, and same time,
Same time. And
Okay.
let's try to get Stuart back here.
Okay, let's write email to him.
Yep.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. This was great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.